I remember the first time I stepped into that room. It didn't scream. It didn't whisper. It didn't say a damn thing. It was silent in a way that felt wrong. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears, like something's trying to keep the noise out. Or maybe keep something in. The air was thick, stale, like a place that had forgotten what fresh oxygen tasted like. There was a faint odor, not strong enough to knock you out, but sharp enough to make your gut tighten. A mix of chemicals and something worse, something organic. The walls were yellowed with time and nicotine, the carpet stiff with forgotten stains. In the far corner, a steel drum. Beside it, what looked like a mattress stripped down to its skeleton. And there, in the middle of it all, was the chair. The restraints were still attached. It was just a one-bedroom apartment. That's what people forget. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't have a dungeon or a castle. He had a second-floor unit with bad wallpaper and neighbors on both sides. And yet, inside this ordinary box was a space where humanity ended. They call it the silent room. Apt, I think, because in here, the screams didn't echo. They died. They dissolved into the wallpaper. They soaked into the mattress. They were swallowed by that room and never came back out. And I couldn't stop thinking, what kind of man needs a room where screams can't escape? You can't understand the room without understanding the man. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. To the outside world, he was quiet, polite even, kept to himself. The kind of man you'd pass in the hallway, nod at, and forget 5 seconds later. But behind those hollow eyes was something else. He didn't start with death. He started with control. That's the word that kept coming up the more I read, the more I watched, the more I stood in that room. Control. He didn't want partners. He didn't want love. He wanted obedience, stillness. People who would never leave him. People who would stay no matter what. The loneliness consumed him. It twisted his fantasies, turned need into obsession, desire into horror. He wanted to create a living corpse. Someone who looked alive, who could breathe, blink, move, but wouldn't talk back, wouldn't run, wouldn't scream. That's when he started experimenting. He brought them here, young men, most of them just looking for a drink, a little fun. He lured them in with promises, flattery, money. But once they stepped into the apartment, the world closed behind them. He drugged them. Wait. Then begin. A drill, a funnel, acid, boiling water. He thought he could pour it into their skulls, just the right amount to erase the parts of them that thought, that resisted. He wanted to carve out the soul and leave the body behind. It's one thing to read about what happened. It's another thing to stand there, to breathe the same air. The room wasn't big, 12 by 20 feet maybe. But somehow it felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, like the ceiling hung just a little too low. Everything in that space felt off. The refrigerator door creaked when I opened it. Inside, empty now, of course. But the memory of what used to be in there was harder to scrub away than any stain. Heads, hearts, a human bicep, wrapped in plastic like leftovers. Jeffrey said he kept them for company. He said the act of consuming them made him feel closer to his victims. A way to make them a part of him. I turned away and looked at the steel drum in the corner. It was the only thing that felt truly heavy in the room. It had once been filled with acid, Dahmer's homemade solution to make bodies disappear. Some victims never left that drum. Others were stored in the freezer in pieces. He labeled them like groceries. And then there was the bed. Just a mattress on the floor, with black stains that no one had bothered to explain. Next to it, handcuffs bolted into the bed frame, a Polaroid camera, a drawer full of drills, syringes, and bleach. That was his setup. Simple, clinical, efficient. But the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was what I felt. As if the walls were holding their breath, as if they remembered. I kept thinking about Konarak, 14 years old. He'd escaped once, naked, bleeding, brain-damaged, wandering the street. Neighbors called the cops, but when the police arrived, Dahmer smiled. Said Konarak was his drunk boyfriend, said they'd had a fight. And somehow, the police believed him. They returned the boy to Dahmer, right back into this room. That night, Dahmer finished what he started. I stood where that boy had stood, confused, terrified, his skull still wet from a drill bit. And I realized, this room didn't need chains on the walls to be a prison. It was the prison. Sound didn't carry here, not because the walls were thick, but because pain, fear, even death was ignored, forgotten, unheard. Some say the room was cursed, that after Dahmer's arrest, anyone who entered could still feel the air shift, could still hear faint whispers when the light flickered. I used to laugh at that. Not anymore. Because the moment I touched the wall, I swear I felt something touch me back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Even after I left the building, even after I put miles between me and that room, it felt like the silence had followed me. Have you ever felt a soundless scream clawing behind your ears? That's what it was like. I kept hearing things that weren't there, not loud, not obvious. A creak in the hallway, a breath that didn't belong to me, the faint drip, drip, drip of something behind the walls. I told myself it was in my head, that I'd just let the horror get too close. But deep down, I knew better. That room, the silent room, it doesn't let go. The next day, I listened to old police recordings, the arrest tapes, interviews with neighbors. Some of them described hearing strange noises before Dahmer's arrest, but no one ever investigated, not really. They said they didn't want to get involved. One woman remembered hearing a power drill in the middle of the night, again and again. She thought he was remodeling, but he wasn't fixing anything. He was breaking people, from the inside out. The thing is, the more I read, the more I heard, not in the tapes, in my own apartment. In the corners of silence between my thoughts, something lingering just under the surface. I started dreaming in static. Dark rooms, bound limbs, a face with hollow eyes watching me from the foot of my bed. Not Dahmer's face, but someone else's, someone who never got to leave. And then there was the smell. It came out of nowhere, like rotting meat and bleach. I'd walk into my kitchen and gag. I scrubbed everything, emptied the trash, but it never went away. That's when I stopped pretending. I wasn't alone. Whatever lived in that room, a piece of it had come back with me. Maybe it wasn't a ghost, maybe it was just memory, soaked deep into my skin like smoke. But whatever it was, it whispered things. I couldn't hear them clearly, not at first, just noise, like teeth grinding behind drywall. But every night, it got closer, clearer. And one night, just before I woke up sweating and screaming, I heard it, a voice, barely more than a breath. It said, "Help me." I went back. I told myself it was for closure, for answers. But truthfully, I think it was because I had to. Like some part of me was still in that room, still trapped with all the others. The building was gone by then, demolished years ago, an empty lot now, grass growing over cement bones. The city wanted to forget, wanted to erase it. But you can't bulldoze memory. You can't bury a scream that never had the chance to escape. I stood where the apartment used to be, Unit 213. I closed my eyes, and I heard it again. Not a scream, not a whisper. Breathing, shallow, broken, waiting. I think about them sometimes, the victims, what their last moments must have been like. Some of them trusted him, some begged, some were too drugged to understand what was happening. And yet, all of them died in silence because no one listened, because no one believed, because no one wanted to see the monster hiding behind a soft voice and polite smile. Jeffrey Dahmer was caught, convicted, murdered in prison. But his room, the idea of it, never died. It lives in every ignored gut feeling, every time we hear something strange in the walls and pretend it's nothing. Every moment we choose comfort over confrontation. That silence, it still feeds. And me? I brought part of it home. I can feel it in the spaces between heartbeats, in the mirror when I'm not looking directly at it, in that same whisper that returns some nights, always the same words, I never left. They say trauma echoes, that energy lingers. Maybe that room wasn't haunted by spirits, but by the weight of what was done inside it, by all the sound that should have been heard, but wasn't. And now I understand what made that room so terrifying. It wasn't the blood, or the bones, or even the bodies. It was the absence, the terrifying absence of sound, of mercy, of humanity. The silent room didn't just swallow screams, it swallowed souls. And if you listen long enough, if you truly listen, you might still hear them, calling, crying, begging, to never be forgotten.